Control of respiration is the topic of this screencast. You may find information on this topic in Chapter 13 of your textbook. The learning objectives of this screencast are as follows. Identify the parts of the brain that control breathing and the nerves responsible for transmitting motor output for control of breathing. Define eupnia, hyperpnea, and hyperventilation. Describe conscious control of breathing. Describe emotional control of breathing. Describe control of breathing by chemical factors, carbon dioxide, pH, and oxygen. And lastly, define hypoxia and cyanosis. Breathing is regulated by the nervous system, specifically the medulla and the pons. That is the respiratory center that control both the rate and depth of breathing. The medulla oblongata contains these self-excitatory or pacemaker cells which set the basic rhythm, and the pons controls the transition from inspiration to expiration. Nerve impulses are transmitted from the medulla and pons via the intercostal nerves to the internal and external intercostal muscles, and via the phrenic nerves to the diaphragm. An overdose of sleeping pills, morphine, alcohol, other drugs can completely suppress the medulla's respiratory center, and this can cause respiratory arrest. Also, if you remember, the phrenic nerve, which extends from the cervical plexus, can be severely damaged or completely severed as a result of a neck injury, or if there's not care given to a neck injury that can occur. That's why it's so important to immobilize the neck if someone's in an accident where it's suspected that there is damage to the neck. Within the context of neural regulation of breathing, let's define a few terms. Eupnia is the normal respiratory rate, which typically is between 12 and 15 ventilations per minute. This, of course, is going to differ due to a person's age, their gender, and other factors. Eupnia is maintained by the medulla and pons. Hyperpnea is an increase in respiration rate due to extra oxygen needs, such as occurs during exercise. With hyperpnea, expiration can become active rather than passive. In eupnia, inhalation is active, and during exhalation, the muscles that were involved in increasing the size of the thoracic cavity simply relax, and there's no active expiration. However, with hyperpnea, where one is forcing air out, exhalation becomes active as well. As you are aware, we do have a certain amount of conscious control of breathing. You can make the decision to breathe or not to breathe to a certain extent. When you dive in the water, you hold your breath. You may hold your breath to try to cure hiccups. You may walk past something that's emitting a foul odor and you decide to hold your breath. And there can be other reasons. What's happening is the cerebral cortex is sending nerve impulses to the medulla and the pons, inhibiting their sending of nerve impulses to the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. However, as you know, conscious control of breathing is limited. If you hold your breath, the time will come where the medulla and pons will eventually start ignoring the cerebral cortex. So, when that kid gets mad because you don't give them what they want and they start holding their breath, and even if they start turning colors, if you wait long enough, eventually they'll pass out and then they'll start breathing again. So my suggestion would be just to, when a kid wants to take you to task by holding their breath, just make sure there's nothing that they can fall on and hurt themselves. And after they wake up from being passed out on the floor, I doubt they'll try that again. I found this little saying online, which I thought was pretty good. My kid threatened to hold her breath until I gave her dessert. She's now passed out on the kitchen floor. I don't negotiate with terrorists. Emotional factors can also play a role in regulation of breathing. I'm sure that you've had the experience of watching a horror movie where you're sort of waiting with bated breath. When we're surprised, a lot of times we'll gasp, or in response to being scared or anxiety, we'll start to hyperventilate, where we increase respiration rate in the absence of a need for higher amounts of oxygen. While volition and emotional factors play a role in regulating breathing, the most important regulator of breathing is chemical. It is carbon dioxide and pH. The medulla oblongata responds directly to changes in the pH of the cerebral spinal fluid. How is carbon dioxide involved in changes in pH? Well, carbon dioxide and water form carbonic acid, and they dissociate as follows. Carbon dioxide plus water yields carbonic acid. Carbonic acid then dissociates into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. So the higher the levels of carbon dioxide in the blood and cerebral spinal fluid, the higher the hydrogen ion concentration, and therefore the lower the blood pH and pH of the cerebral spinal fluid. Therefore, the respiratory centers of the brainstem respond to hypercapnia, or an elevated level of carbon dioxide in the blood. So as carbon dioxide levels increase, pH decreases, and that stimulates the medulla oblongata. Again, carbon dioxide combines with water to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid then dissociates into bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions. And so as hydrogen ion concentration increases, pH decreases. And in response, your medulla oblongata is excited and it sends out nerve impulses, giving you the urge to breathe. That is why when you hold your breath, the longer you hold your breath, the greater and greater you get this urge to breathe. Now, on the flip side, as pH decreases, as blood pH decreases, respiration rate decreases. This is why, after an episode of hyperventilation, individuals will actually tend to stop breathing or undergo apnea for a short period of time. The medulla oblongata modifies breathing rate and depth in order to regulate blood pH in the normal range. This is why at one point breathing in a bag after hyperventilation was suggested, because when you hyperventilate, you're blowing off carbon dioxide and you're raising blood pH. If you rebreathe air that you've exhaled into a bag, you'll be inhaling air that is higher in carbon dioxide than ambient air, and in theory, that should help restore blood pH more quickly. Now, I'm no clinician, but I don't believe that it's recommended that you breathe into a bag after hyperventilation or during hyperventilation. Since I mentioned hyperventilation, I want to make sure that there's a clear understanding between the difference between hyperpnea and hyperventilation, because both refer to an elevation in breathing or rate of breathing. But there is a very important distinction. With hyperpnea, there's increasing in breathing rate and depth in response to an increase in oxygen demand by the body, such as during strenuous exercise, running, jogging, swimming. Muscles are working harder, they're using more energy, there's more ATP needed, therefore there's more oxygen needed to make that ATP. With hyperventilation, there's an increase in breathing rate in the absence of an increase in the demand for oxygen. You may ask the question, if the respiratory system, if one of its main functions is to oxygenate the blood in order to get oxygen to our tissues, does it respond to a lack of oxygen? And the answer to that question is yes. The medulla oblongata will respond to a lack of oxygen directly. And there are also oxygen sensors in the aorta and the carotid artery that detect levels of oxygen and send sensory input to the medulla oblongata. But they're not very sensitive to a lack of arterial oxygen, or what's called hypoxia. They only respond when oxygen levels are dangerously low. That is why, if you've ever ridden on a plane, when they're going through the safety features, they always tell you if there's a loss of cabin pressure and the masks fall, that you are to put them on. They don't say if you feel like you need air, put on the oxygen masks. They say you put them on immediately. And in fact, you put them on yourselves before you assist a smaller child. Why? Well, if there's a loss of cabin pressure, the partial pressure of all gases will fall, including carbon dioxide. So you're not going to encounter a buildup of carbon dioxide in your blood. So you're never going to get that urge to breathe. And in fact, if you more likely you're going to pass out due to hypoxia. And so you are to immediately put on the masks, and in fact, you put them on yourselves before you assist a smaller child, because if you were to assist a smaller child, the hypoxia might cause you to pass out in the process, and then that child might be too small to assist putting the mask on you. So the human body is designed to respond to hypercapnia, or an elevation in carbon dioxide levels in the blood. It's not designed to respond to hypoxia, which is low carbon dioxide levels in the blood. Rather than being sensitive to hypoxia, the respiratory center responds to hypercapnia, or a increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in arterial blood. When you hold your breath, that urge to breathe is due to a buildup of carbon dioxide and your respiratory center responding to that, rather than a drop in oxygen levels. Generally, an increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is associated with a decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen. So your respiratory center seeks to control the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood by responding to and controlling carbon dioxide levels. So hypoxia leads to inadequate delivery of oxygen to body tissues. And this can lead to a condition called cyanosis, or the skin can be said to be cyanotic and taking on a bluish tone. Now, there could be multiple reasons for lack of adequate delivery of um, oxygen to tissues beyond just the oxygen levels of the blood being low. Can be due to an impaired or blocked circulation as well. But the bluish tone taken on by body tissues is cyanosis. I would like to take a moment to talk about a specific type of hypoxia called carbon monoxide poisoning. And the reason why this is important is because most deaths that occur due to fire are actually due to carbon monoxide poisoning. Most individuals who die in a fire or who die related to a fire incident don't actually die from being burned to death, but usually due to hypoxia, due to carbon monoxide poisoning. So let's take a moment to talk about what that is exactly. So you probably are aware that combustion of a fuel, whether it is methane or wood, produces water, heat, and carbon dioxide. However, there is always some incomplete combustion that occurs whenever a fuel is burned or combusted. And so we have the production of some carbon monoxide. And how much carbon monoxide is produced really depends on the availability of oxygen for combustion. But for the most part, any time you have combustion of a fuel, you're going to have the production of some carbon monoxide. Now, the problem with carbon monoxide is it does not alter the pH of the blood. Therefore, your body cannot detect an increase in the rise of carbon monoxide in the blood, like it can detect a rise in carbon dioxide in the blood because it changes the pH. And this presents a significant problem. The danger of carbon monoxide is that it competes with oxygen for the binding site on hemoglobin. In fact, it binds more efficiently to hemoglobin than does oxygen. So carbon monoxide, when inhaled, can drop the oxygen content of your blood significantly to a level that it can actually cause hypoxia and death. And the danger of carbon monoxide is it's odorless, it's colorless, and if you are asleep, your body will not respond to it. So in other words, you will not be aroused from sleep because oxygen levels drop in your blood as a result of an increase in carbon monoxide. So you can die in your sleep of carbon monoxide poisoning. And this happens many times every year across the United States, usually due to insufficient ventilation of a gas furnace or a hot water heater that uses gas to heat the water. And so several people, hundreds of people rather, lose their lives due to carbon monoxide poisoning in the United States every year. Treatment of carbon monoxide poisoning is to provide the victim with 100% oxygen until that carbon monoxide is cleared from the body. And if one is available, a hyperbolic chamber is used to greatly increase the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood. As I said, hundreds of people die from carbon monoxide poisoning a year, and it is completely preventable. You should have in your dwelling a carbon monoxide detector if you have any natural gas burning appliances like a gas burning hot water heater or furnace. It'll only cost you about $30 and they can save your lives. Back in North Carolina, all landlords are required to provide these detectors in their rental dwellings. I do not know if that is the case in the state that you're living in, but if you do not have a carbon monoxide detector in your house or apartment, make sure that you invest a little money to get one because it can save your life. Let's review the learning objectives of the screencast. Identify the parts of the brain that control breathing and the nerves responsible for transmitting motor output for control of breathing. Define eupnia, hyperpnea, and hyperventilation. Describe conscious control of breathing, emotional control of breathing, and describe control of breathing by chemical factors, carbon dioxide, NPH, and oxygen. And lastly, define hypoxia and cyanosis. Your final screencast will be respiratory disorders and developmental aspects of the respiratory system.